We now move on. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Offshore Petroleum Licensing Bill, second reading.
Now.
The reasoned amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition has been selected. Minister, to move the second reading, I call the Secretary of State. Is it the Minister? Coutinho. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Britain is the first major economy to halve its emissions. That is an incredible achievement. How have we done this? We've increased our renewable electricity capacity fivefold since 2010. Nearly half our electricity comes from renewables now, up from 7% in 2010. And just 2 weeks ago, I set out the largest nuclear expansion for 70 years. And going forward, we continue to have some of the most ambitious climate change targets of any major economy in the world. Here in the UK, we're committed to reducing emissions by at least 68% in 2030 from 1990 levels. Where is everybody else? The EU is committed to 55%, having recently rejected a move to 57%, and the United States is just at 40%. It is clear that when it comes to climate change, we can be very proud of our record and the work that we are going to do. We've managed to achieve this whilst acting to help families with their energy bills. We stepped in to help families struggling with energy prices after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and our total support for the cost of living stands at £104 billion, a package which is amongst the most generous in Europe. Last year, we passed the Landmark Energy Act, which lays the foundation for a cleaner, more secure energy system. Our changes to competition, to managing energy consumption and incentivising investment in new technology will mean billions in savings for consumers as we work towards net zero. We've overseen a huge increase in the number of homes which are energy efficient from 14% in 2010 to close to half today, and we're investing more over the next Parliament to continue this important work.
I'm very grateful for the Minister for giving way, and she paints a very rosy picture, particularly when it comes to renewables. So why is it that the Minister's own energy czar has resigned in protest?
Well, I thank the Honourable
Secretary.
We don't actually have an energy czar, but we have an energy Secretary of State. And let me tell you, I respect the Honourable Member for Kingswood. I wish him well in his next job. But if the thing that you care about is making sure that we reduce emissions, the question that everybody in this chamber needs to answer is why would you want to import fuel with higher emissions from abroad? Now, we are investing in more renewable energy. We are starting a nuclear revival. We will support new technologies like hydrogen, carbon capture and fusion. And this is our plan to have a balanced energy policy. However, we need to make sure that the transition works for the British public and the British economy. Our plans can't be based on ideology. They must be based on common sense. Even the Climate Change Committee's own data shows that when we reach net zero in 2050, we'll still be using oil and gas for a significant portion of our energy. And that's because it is not absolute zero, it is net zero. In other words, while our use of oil and gas is going to rapidly diminish, we will still need both for decades to come. Our bill will improve our energy security and the energy security of Europe. In the last 2 years, Europe has had to wean itself off Russian oil and gas. We have responded by tripling gas export to the continent, and we were a net exporter of electricity to Europe in 2022 for the first time in more than a decade. We do not live in a world where we can simply turn off oil and gas.
To the Honourable Lady, but is she saying that the only licences the government intend to issue are for those for gas and oil that are destined for the British market?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman. I'm glad that he raised this question because I know that the Labour Party have been spouting an awful lot of nonsense when it comes to this area. In the UK, we are blessed with a geological gift that is the North Sea. It's an incredible national asset. And the gas that is produced there, virtually all of that gas goes straight into the UK gas transmission network, and that is equivalent to about 50% of our overall gas needs. When it comes to oil, 90% of what is refined abroad is refined in Europe. We are a net importer overall. And the question that I think the honourable gentleman should answer is, if Europe did not get that oil from the UK, where would he like them to get it from? From Russia or further afield? And this is the question at the heart of the bill. We know that we are going to need oil and gas. Where do we want that to come from? Only an ideologue would argue that we are better off importing dirtier fuels from abroad rather than using what we can produce at home. But it is not just energy security that dictates that we should use our own resources. The economic case also shows that introducing annual licensing is the right thing to do.
And would she accept that, despite the way in which some members of this House have tried to rubbish the idea that having our own oil and gas doesn't mean any energy security for the UK, 88% of the gas which we extract at present actually stays in the UK. Would we prefer to import that?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for making this point. Not only is it better for energy security, but gas that we bring in from abroad through LNG has 4 times higher emissions. So if you care about the environment, then you should back this bill. Domestic oil and gas production adds about £16 billion to the UK economy annually. It brings in tens of billions of pounds of tax revenue. And to give an example of how this has helped support families with the cost of living, last year we raised £9 billion in tax revenue from the oil and gas sector. That is money that we can use to support families like we did last winter, paying half the average family's energy bill, which roughly amounted to £1,500 per household. I am going to make some progress. If we had no oil and gas sector, then £9 billion more would have fallen on taxpayers' shoulders. And why should we forgo this tax revenue to other countries? What possible benefit could the British public feel from billions of pounds in tax revenue that could be raised here being sent abroad, all to import fuel with higher emissions? And now let me turn to perhaps the most important reason to back this bill, the workers. I will in a moment. There are 200,000 people supported by the sector in communities like Aberdeen and Grimsby, and those in the northeast of England. 93,000 people in Scotland, over 10,000 people in Yorkshire and the Humber, 14,000 people in the northwest. I'll happily give way on that point.
I'm grateful to her for giving way. She will know as well as I do that most of our gas that we import comes from Norway, where gas production is half as polluting as it is in the UK. So let's not have all of this nonsense about imports being so much higher carbon intensity, because from Norway they're certainly not. And secondly, will she accept the fact that most of the emissions are actually produced when we consume the oil and gas, and therefore will she start looking at Scope 3 emissions, not just the production emissions, which are not the greatest emissions in question?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, but I think her question fundamentally misunderstands the energy market, because when we cannot get Norwegian gas, when we've made the most of all of our gas, what is the marginal gas that we use? It is LNG, which has 4 times higher the emissions than what we can produce here. You produce less UK gas, you need more LNG.
Not complicated.
Coming back to what I think is a really critical part of this bill is the workers. A recent report from Robert Gordon University found that a faster decline in our oil and gas sector, which the opposition is proposing, could halve the workforce by 2030, leading to a significant loss of skills for the future energy sector. Because, Mr. Speaker, these are the workers whose skills we will need for our future energy production. The same report found that over 90% of the UK's oil and gas workforce have skills that are transferable to the offshore renewables sector. However, if we do not manage that transition correctly, and everybody here agrees that we do need to transition, then we will lose those very important workers and their skills, because it is the same people who are working on oil and gas rigs today that we will need on the offshore wind farms of tomorrow. Our subsea installation engineers who lay cables, our technicians who remotely operate subsea vehicles, our divers, project managers, engineering specialists servicing our offshore rigs. These are all essential oil and gas jobs which we know will be critical in the rollout of our low-carbon technologies. If we do not protect our world-leading specialists, we will see communities decimated and ultimately a skills exodus which would put at risk the very transition that we are working so hard to achieve.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. She makes a very powerful point when it comes to both energy security but also jobs, British jobs, getting us jobs. But does she also agree with me? Recently, I visited the Falkland Islands with a cross-party delegation, and when we met with the Falkland Island government, they're desperate to unlock the sea lion field to get British workers to operate that oil field as well. Obviously, Falkland Islands are British overseas territory, yet they're being stymied by the UK Treasury, who won't underwrite that. Well, the Honourable Lady said the next point we should do is actually back overseas territories by developing their oil fields, so we can have good British overseas territories, oil and gas, in the UK, have British jobs in the overseas territories, and support our one big, happy Commonwealth and overseas territories family.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. He makes an interesting point. I'd be very happy to meet with him to discuss that further. But let me turn to investment when it comes to the sector. I think we actually agree across all sides of the House that we want to be a world leader in clean energy technologies. Here in Britain, we have many competitive advantages, and we want to exploit all of them to have a brighter energy and economic future. But right now, the oil and gas sector is investing in hydrogen, in carbon capture and offshore wind. A well-managed transition helps ensure that as we get more investment and we grow these sectors, people can transition alongside in an orderly and organic way. To shut down the oil and gas sector too soon would not only risk that investment, would not only make it harder to do the transition and see those sectors grow more slowly, but it would risk people's livelihoods too. The Offshore Petroleum Licensing Bill will give industry the certainty it needs to invest in this important sector. If we need oil and gas in the decades to come, it should come from Britain where it can. And using the resources on our doorstep to benefit Britain is simple common sense. This new legislation will require the North Sea Transition Authority to run an annual process for new exploration and production licences in the UK continental shelf, subject to key tests being met. First, that the UK is projected to remain a net importer of both oil and gas, and second, that carbon emissions associated with UK gas are lower than imported and liquefied natural gas. These tests are in place to provide assurance that proceeding with annual licensing remains the right thing to do. This bill will provide industry with certainty on the future of licensing rounds, increasing investor and industry confidence. It will increase our energy security. It will protect 200,000 jobs. It will secure tens of billions in tax revenue, and will help us reach net zero. But don't just take my word for it. Voices across industry recognise the need for new licences for net zero and for our energy security. In fact, as Stuart Payne, the CEO of the North Sea Transition Authority, recently wrote, producing as much of the oil and gas we need as possible domestically is the right thing to do for security and the economy. Offshore Energies UK have said the UK needs the churn of new licences to manage production decline. National Gas has said that by backing gas today, we can create jobs, secure energy independence, deliver net zero and keep costs down for households and businesses. And the General Secretary of the GMB has said that not proceeding with new licensing risks leaving the UK even more dependent on energy imports to heat homes and power industry in future. That is bad for our national security and prosperity. I have no doubt that the opposition will whip its MPs against this bill today. They want to shut down new oil and gas licences. They've been very clear about that. I suspect that there are many in the Labour Party who understand what turning off the taps would mean for British workers, and they will vote against this bill with a heavy heart. They know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has got this wrong. Isn't it just common sense that if we need oil and gas, it should come from UK waters, rather than from foreign and often unreliable regimes abroad? Isn't it better to produce our own gas instead of shipping in liquefied natural gas, which has 4 times the production emissions of our own? Isn't it right that the billions of pounds in tax that we raise from this sector stays here rather than being sent abroad? And isn't it the position of an ideologue to say we will not support 200,000 British workers, but we are happy for those jobs to go to Russia or further abroad? The position of the Labour Party and the SNP is not right for the environment, not right for the economy, and not right for the energy security of this country. As the head of the GMB warned this weekend, it would be exporting jobs for the sake of importing virtue. It would mean thousands of jobs lost, communities decimated, tax revenue forgone, and also the Right Honourable Gentleman can appease his friends in Just Stop Oil. They are putting the interests of extreme climate ideologues over that of ordinary workers. And what of Labour's wider energy policy? The truth is that when it comes to this critical policy area, their policies are as clear as mud. We know that it hinges on borrowing £28 billion. That would mean thousands of pounds in extra taxes for every family. Whilst we are cutting taxes, Mr Deputy Speaker, the opposition would see them soar. That is not what the people of this country need. The right honourable gentleman should level with the British public. What taxes would he raise to pay this extra £28 billion of borrowing? The Shadow Business Secretary said that £28 billion is the scale of investment required. The opposition have said that they need to spend £28 billion in order to meet their 2030 decarbonisation ambition. So why won't the right honourable gentleman opposite set out which taxes he would raise? How is he going to squeeze more money out of hard-working families to achieve his 2030 pipe dream? If he really thinks the £28 billion in extra spending is essential, he should have the courage to explain how much worse off taxpayers will be. And meanwhile, while the Labour Party struggle to back their own plans, over the past few months we have secured £30 billion of private investment in clean energy. And that is the difference between them and us. We know that private investment is key to the transition. They would rather taxpayers shoulder the costs alone through more borrowing and higher taxes. And that is the choice the House must make today. Do we support the oil and gas sector and the private investment that comes with it, or do we leave taxpayers to foot the bill? We cannot afford to lose the skills, the revenue or the investment the sector provides. To do so would put net zero in jeopardy. And we must deliver this transition in a proportionate, pragmatic and realistic way, ensuring that we make the most of the energy we produce right here in the UK. That is common sense. And that is what this legislation represents. With this bill, we will protect 200,000 jobs, strengthen our energy security, secure tens of billions of pounds in tax revenue, ease the transition to renewable energy, and supply us with a gas which owns only a quarter of the production emissions of liquid natural gas imports. Or we could follow the approach of the opposition and decimate communities who rely on the oil and gas sector, rack up borrowing by £28 billion a year, send taxes soaring to pay for it, and send British jobs and tax revenue abroad, all to import fuel with higher emissions. I think the choice is very clear. We are on the side of common sense, not ideology, and I commend this bill to the House.